In the late 1930s, on the edge of a quiet coastal town, there stood an old shipyard that time had almost forgotten. The shipyard was surrounded by salty air, strong winds, and the endless sound of ocean waves hitting against rocks. Once, years ago, ships had come from many countries to this shore. Workers were busy day and night repairing and building large fishing boats. But over time, the world changed. Bigger ports, stronger factories, and modern shipyards were built in other regions. This old shipyard, which once felt full of life, slowly became silent. Only a small group of workers continued to come every day. They were not wealthy people, nor famous, nor highly respected. They were simple men, some old and some young, who depended on this work for their daily bread. Among them was a man named Elias Harrow. Elias was older than most. His face carried wrinkles from years of heat, smoke, and hard labor. His hands were rough, marked with scars from tools and burning metal. But when he worked, there was something different about him. He was slow to speak, but very thoughtful. He watched every detail carefully, as if metal itself spoke to him. Many people in the town only knew Elias as that old metal worker. They did not know his past. They did not know that many years ago, Elias had once been a highly respected metallurgist in a large city. He had studied metals deeply, how they behaved under heat, how they changed when hammered, how some metals could be made far stronger if treated with patience and skill. But when the big factory where he worked burned down during an industrial accident, he lost everything: his job, his savings, even some friends. Looking for peace and escape from the noise and pain of the city, he came to this quiet coastal town and started working in this old shipyard. The town around the shipyard was small. Most people made their living by fishing, farming, or selling small goods in the market. Life was simple, but not always easy. The people valued kindness and honesty more than titles or money. Every morning before the sun rose, fishermen left in wooden boats. Women walked to wells to collect water. Children played on the beach with shells and driftwood. It was a peaceful life, though always filled with the worry of survival. Around this time, the world outside the town was changing. Nations were tense. Rumors of war spread like smoke in the wind. People spoke quietly about forces growing in neighboring countries, armies marching, ships preparing for conflict. Though the town was far from the center of power, the fear of being attacked someday still lingered in the hearts of many. The government asked different regions to strengthen their defenses, but money was low and resources were limited. The coastal areas, especially small towns like this one, were not seen as priorities. They were left to defend themselves as best they could. One afternoon, word arrived that a foreign trade partner wanted to send a shipment to the coastal region. The officials and workers gathered at the dock to watch the transport ships approaching. Everyone expected something useful, perhaps strong steel, machine parts, or tools that could strengthen their defenses. But when the cargo was opened, disappointment spread through the crowd. The shipment was full of scrap metal, huge broken pieces of old ships, rusted beams, bent and twisted metal plates, parts of machines that no longer worked. It looked like garbage. The government had accepted it because it was free. They had hoped there might be something valuable buried inside. But when most workers saw the pile, they shook their heads. It looked useless. They laughed and called it junk metal, waste, and nothing but trash. Some officials were embarrassed. Some became angry. A few people even shouted, saying, "What are we supposed to do with this? Build toys? We need weapons, strong materials, not garbage." But while others mocked, Elias stepped forward quietly. His eyes studied the pile differently, not with frustration but with curiosity. He walked slowly around the heap, touching the metal with his rough hands, knocking on some pieces with his knuckles, listening to the sound they made. The workers who watched him thought he was wasting time, but Elias did not care. He recognized something that others did not. Some of the metal pieces did not come from ordinary ships. They came from warships, vessels built with strong alloy steel that was specially treated to survive intense battles, heat, and pressure. Even though the metal was rusted on the outside, Elias knew that beneath the corrosion the core strength was still there. It only needed to be cleaned, reforged, and shaped carefully. But when Elias tried to explain this to the officials, they did not take him seriously. One said, "You're an old man. You don't understand modern needs anymore." Another said, "Scrap is scrap. We cannot rely on trash." A third man laughed and said, If you think you can make something useful out of that pile, be my guest. But don't expect any support from us, Elias did not argue. He simply nodded and walked back to the shipyard. The younger workers followed him, whispering, wondering if he really believed what he had said. That evening, after the sun had set and the town prepared for sleep, Elias returned to the shipyard. He lit the old furnace, though it took time because the machinery was worn and slow. The other workers saw the glow from a distance. Some went home to rest, but a few, those who respected Elias, stayed behind and helped. Among them were Tomas, a young man with strong arms and little patience but a good heart. Rafi, a quiet and thoughtful machinist who admired Elias like a mentor. Jonah, a welder who had been struggling to feed his family and hoped this work might bring new income. Together they began cleaning the scrap metal. They used hammers to break away rust. They scrubbed with metal brushes. They heated small pieces in the furnace to test how they changed under heat. During these hours, Elias spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried meaning. "This metal is not dead," he said softly. "It only looks weak. But strength can hide beneath damage, just like people." The others listened carefully. Unlike the officials who dismissed Elias, these men trusted him. They had seen him fix broken machines with techniques no one else knew. They had seen him reshape damaged tools into something stronger than before. So even though many doubted the scrap metal, these few believed. Little by little, news spread in the town that Elias and a small team were working with the scrap. Some people laughed, calling it foolish. Others hoped maybe something good could come out of it. No one knew for sure, but every night the furnace glowed like a small sun in the darkness, like a symbol of effort and determination. The smell of burning metal filled the air. Sparks flew like fireflies. Sweat dripped from faces. It was hard work. Slow work, painful work. But there was also something beautiful about it. Something meaningful. Because in that shipyard, among rust and broken pieces, people were not just working with metal, they were working with hope. And while the world outside prepared for war, inside this forgotten shipyard something extraordinary was beginning to take shape, not yet visible, not yet understood but quietly growing, waiting for the right moment to reveal its purpose. The days that followed were not easy for Elias and the men working with him. Every morning the shipyard felt colder, as if the sea breeze itself doubted their efforts. The government officials had already dismissed the project. They did not provide money, new tools, or even extra workers. They believed Elias was wasting time, so the small group had to work in secret, using whatever material and equipment the old shipyard already had. Most of those tools were rusty, worn out, and unreliable. The furnace they used was very old. Sometimes it heated too slowly, other times too quickly. It groaned and shook like an old giant being forced awake. The workers had to watch it constantly because a small mistake could ruin an entire batch of metal. They slept less and worked more, but still none of them complained. The belief that something great could come from the scrap metal gave them energy. Even when their bodies were tired, every night, when the town went quiet and lanterns in the houses were turned off one by one, the shipyard was still awake. Flames glowed inside the furnace like a flickering heart. Sparks flew up in the air and disappeared into the darkness, dancing like tiny stars. The sound of hammers striking metal echoed through the night. Slow, heavy, determined strikes. Not rushed, not careless. But outside the shipyard, rumors began to spread. Some people in the town started making fun of the workers. They think they can make weapons from garbage, some laughed. Maybe. They are just bored, others said. Some even doubted Elias's state of mind. He's too old now. Maybe he's lost his sense. But there were also people who watched quietly, hopeful yet unsure. They knew Elias was not just an ordinary worker. They had seen his calm and thoughtful nature. They tried to trust, though fear always lived in their hearts. The tension of possible war rested over everyone like a shadow, and a shadow makes hope hard to see. Meanwhile, Elias and the team faced problem after problem. Many pieces of scrap metal were too brittle to use. Some had deep internal cracks that only appeared when heated. They had to try different temperatures, different hammering rhythms, and new cooling methods. It felt like a battle. One mistake and all work of that day would be wasted. There were days when the furnace stopped working completely. The pipes got clogged with soot. The wheel that pumped air into the flames jammed, and it took hours just to fix. Sometimes the team had to break the metal by hand because the old cutting machine could not handle the thickness. Their hands burned, their backs ached, and their eyes were red from smoke. One evening, after a long day of repeated failures, Thomas finally lost his patience. He threw down his hammer and shouted, "We're wasting our lives. Look at us, everyone thinks we are fools. Maybe they are right. Maybe this scrap is just scrap." His voice echoed through the shipyard. Silence followed. The others looked at him, tired and frustrated too, but they did not speak. Elias, however, didn't show anger. Instead, he wiped sweat from his forehead and gently approached Thomas. His voice was low, steady, almost calming. "Do you remember the old boat we repaired last winter?" Elias asked. Thomas didn't respond, but his expression softened slightly. "It looked broken beyond saving," Elias continued. "But when we cleaned it, shaped it, rebuilt it slowly, it became strong again, and fishermen still use it today. They trust it with their lives." Thomas lowered his head. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. "Strength is not always visible at first. You must believe in what your hands can create even when others do not." The moment was soft but powerful. Thomas picked up his hammer again. The others nodded quietly. The work continued, but physical problems were not the only struggles. Food was limited. The workers had to eat simple meals, bread, fish stew, sometimes only boiled grains. They were not paid extra for the secret work because no one officially recognized it. Some of them had families who waited at home, wondering why they were always late, worried that something might happen to them. Jonah, the welder, often thought of his wife and 2 small children. His wife Lila worked at a small bakery. She tried to support the family, but the income was barely enough. Some nights Jonah would sit outside the shipyard staring at the sea, wondering if he should quit and find another job, something steady, something guaranteed. But every time he considered leaving, he remembered the look of determination in Elias's eyes. It was not the look of a foolish man. It was the look of someone who knew something others did not yet understand. And so, Jonah continued. Rafi, the quiet machinist, was different. He did not worry about food or money as much. His struggle was internal. He feared failure deeply. He was always careful, always precise, always overthinking. Every small mistake felt like a personal defeat to him. Sometimes he spent too long adjusting the gears, measuring angles, smoothing rough surfaces, but Elias never scolded him. "Care is not weakness," Elias told him once. "Care is love given a form. Keep it." These words made Rafi feel seen in a way no one had ever seen him before, so he kept working too. Yet despite all of their efforts and teamwork, weeks passed with little progress. They managed to clean and melt the metal, yes, but shaping it into something useful, something that could actually defend their homeland, still felt far away. They knew the metal was strong, but they did not yet know how to unlock its full potential. Meanwhile, news from outside the town grew darker. Ships belonging to hostile forces had been seen on distant waters. Soldiers were training in nearby regions. There were rumors that an attack on coastal areas might be planned. Fear settled deeper into people's hearts. The government, however, was slow to act. They were short on supplies, short on money, short on strategy. They simply hoped that war would not come to their doorstep. But hope alone is not protection. In the shipyard, every time the workers heard news of war, they worked even harder, as if racing against time. Their bodies grew thinner, their skin darker from smoke, their hands full of cuts, yet their eyes burned with determination. Some nights the anxiety was so heavy that no one spoke. The only sound was the furnace breathing heat and hammers beating metal. The silence spoke louder than words. They were not just shaping steel, they were shaping the future of their town. But even dedication cannot erase exhaustion. One night, after several failed attempts to forge a large piece of metal, Elias finally let out a long, tired sigh. His face looked older than ever. The others stared at him, suddenly worried. They had never seen him look defeated before. Even if only for a moment, it was enough to shake their hearts. But then something unusual happened. Rafi stepped forward. Quiet, shy, uncertain Rafi. He looked at Elias and spoke in a firm, steady voice. "You taught us something," he said. "You taught us that strength is hidden, that we must keep shaping until it reveals itself. We can't stop now, not when the world outside is changing. We have something to finish, something important." The others watched in silence. Elias looked at Rafi, and a small smile formed on his tired face. "Yes," Elias said softly. "We continue." And they did. The struggle continued, but now something had changed. Not in the metal, not in the tools, but in the men themselves. They no longer worked only because Elias believed. They worked because they believed too. They believed that even when life offers nothing but broken pieces, something strong and powerful can still be created, something no one else expected, something that could protect everything they loved. They didn't know it yet, but they were getting closer to the discovery that would change everything. The night that changed everything did not begin differently from any other night. The sky was dark and cloudy, and the sea waves crashed against the rocks with heavy sound. The shipyard looked tired, as if it had been working just as hard as the men inside it. The furnace glowed, and the air smelled of smoke and hot iron. The workers were exhausted. Their clothes were soaked in sweat. Their hands were rough and blistered, and their eyes were heavy. But even in silence, there was a strong feeling that they had to continue. They were working on a new batch of metal pieces collected from the large scrap heap. These pieces were thick, heavy, and covered in layers of thick rust. It had taken them hours just to clean them enough to place in the furnace. The metal was heating, slowly turning brighter, from deep red to orange to glowing yellow. Elias stood near the furnace, watching every shade of color, every spark, every movement of heat. His eyes were sharp, focused, like someone listening to a language only he understood. Suddenly, the furnace made a loud rattling noise. It was not unusual for the old furnace to complain, but this sound was different, deeper, more threatening. Rafi, who was controlling the air valve, stepped back quickly. Thomas rushed to adjust the pressure. Jonah grabbed his welding gloves, preparing in case something broke. But the furnace did not explode. Instead, the metal inside began reacting strangely. The color shifted unevenly. Some parts glowed bright white while others remained darker. Elias noticed it immediately. "Stop," he said quietly at first. No one heard him. "Stop," he said louder, firm this time. Everyone froze. Tomas turned off the air pump. Rafi closed the valve. Jonah stepped back. The men stood completely still, the furnace glowing in front of them like the center of the world. Elias slowly approached the furnace. He leaned in slightly, watching the way the metal moved inside the heat. Something was different. Something was changing. Something no one had expected. He turned to the others. "Open it," he said. They hesitated. Opening the furnace too early could ruin the metal. But they trusted him. Slowly they pulled the door open. A wave of heat burst out like a dragon's breath. The men covered their faces with their arms. When the heat settled slightly, they looked inside. The metal was layered, not in a normal way. It had formed natural lines within itself, almost like rings in a tree trunk or layers in ancient stone. Elias's eyes widened. He understood what it meant instantly. This was no ordinary steel. The scrap metal had come from old warships designed to withstand heavy impact. The layers were not random. They were part of a forging technique used long ago, a technique to make steel extremely strong while remaining flexible. But it was incomplete. It needed to be reforged in a very specific way, heated to the right temperature, hammered at the right timing, cooled in controlled stages. This technique was rare, almost forgotten, but Elias knew it. He had studied it many years ago, when he still worked in the industrial city. It was a method used for making armor plating for battleships, and now, here it was, revealed inside the scrap metal no one believed in. He turned to the men, his voice filled with excitement that none of them had ever heard from him before. "We can use this," Elias said, his eyes glowing like the furnace. "This metal, if treated correctly, will be stronger than any steel we have ever worked with." Thomas blinked in surprise. "Stronger? Strong enough to make armor?" "No," Elias said, shaking his head slowly. "Strong enough to make something that can defend an entire coastline." The workers stared at him, confused at first. But then understanding began to grow. They were not just going to make tools or simple weapons. They were going to build something powerful, something meaningful, something that could protect their town. The idea came slowly at first, like dawn breaking behind clouds. But once the thought formed, it became clear. The coastline needed defense. They did not have ships. They did not have army forces. But they did have one advantage: the old railroad tracks that ran along the cliffs. Those tracks were used long ago to carry ship parts, but now they were mostly forgotten. Elias looked at the long tracks stretching toward the sea, and he saw something that others would not have imagined. A rail-mounted cannon, a weapon that didn't need to be carried by ships. A weapon that could move on the tracks. A weapon that could fire over long distances, directly at enemy ships approaching the coast. They could build it. And they would build it. Once the idea became clear, the energy in the shipyard changed completely. Exhaustion faded. Fear faded. The men felt purpose again. They began working with new focus, new urgency. They needed a barrel for the cannon, a strong, thick barrel that could withstand massive pressure. The layered metal would be perfect for that, heated and hammered into shape slowly, carefully, repeatedly. It was not a job of hours. It was a job of weeks, maybe months. But they were willing. They needed a firing mechanism. Rafi took charge of the precision work. He crafted gears, levers, and loading mechanisms with extreme care. His hands shook at times, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. They needed a base to mount the cannon. Thomas and Jonah worked together, welding, shaping, and testing the metal joints. They reinforced old rail carts with new steel plates to hold the cannon steady. Every day, they worked. Every night, they worked. The furnace glowed without rest. Sparks lit up the darkness. The sound of hammering echoed like thunder. Workers fell asleep sitting beside their tools, woke up and continued again. They shared food, shared silence, shared pain, and shared purpose. Sometimes the furnace failed. Sometimes the metal cracked. Sometimes frustration returned. But this time, no one talked about giving up. They had seen what was possible now. They had touched it. The town slowly began noticing the change, too. People saw the men working with new fire in their eyes. They heard the sounds of creation echoing across the coastline. Some brought food to the workers. Some came to watch quietly. They did not fully understand what was being made, but they understood that it was important. Meanwhile, war rumors grew louder. Ships were seen closer than before. Fear spread. But for the first time, the town was not helpless. Something powerful was being forged right in front of them. One night, after many weeks of work, Elias stood before the glowing metal barrel they had almost completed. His eyes were wet, not from smoke but from emotion. He placed his hand gently on the steel and said softly, "We are not just building a weapon. We are building hope." The others nodded. They had begun this journey as men working with broken metal. Now they were men shaping their own future, and soon the world would see what could be built when human determination refused to give up, even when given nothing but scrap. The day the cannon was finally completed did not feel like a celebration at first. The workers had no energy left to cheer. Their arms were tired from weeks of hammering. Their eyes were red from smoke. Their backs hurt from bending and lifting heavy steel. But when they stood around the finished weapon, they felt something deep inside them that was stronger than pride. They felt relief. They felt meaning. They felt that all the pain they had carried was worth it. The cannon was long, thick and heavy, mounted on a reinforced rail car. The metal glowed slightly where it had been polished. The barrel was made from the layered alloy steel that had once been nothing more than junk. It looked strong. It felt strong. It gave the sense of something living, something with purpose. The workers stood quietly around it, each lost in his own thoughts. No one imagined that this creation would soon shape the destiny of the entire town. Days passed after the cannon was completed. The men continued improving the tracks on the cliff so the weapon could be moved if needed. They tested the gears, the barrel, the recoil system. They worked in silence, speaking only when necessary. Even though the cannon stood proudly in front of them, they were afraid to believe too strongly. They knew that real testing would only come when danger appeared. And danger did come. It was early morning when the news first spread. Fishermen returning from the sea came running into the town, shouting and breathless. People looked out toward the horizon and saw the dark shapes of ships far away. Warships, not friendly vessels. These were ships that had been rumored for months. Ships belonging to an enemy force preparing to seize coastal lands. Fear struck the town like a storm. Women gathered their children. Men grabbed old rifles and rusty swords. Some ran to find officials. Others stood frozen, unsure of what to do. No one had expected the threat to arrive so suddenly. Government officers panicked. They argued among themselves. Some wanted to evacuate. Some wanted to surrender. They had no proper weapons, no trained army, no strong defenses. They believed their fate was already sealed. But Elias and the workers did not panic. They walked quietly to the shipyard where the cannon waited. Thomas gripped his hammer tightly. Jonah breathed slowly to calm himself. Rafi checked the gears again and again, even though he had already checked them countless times before. Elias stood at the front. His expression was not filled with fear or excitement. It was filled with calm certainty. When the officers saw them preparing to move the cannon, they laughed in disbelief. "You cannot be serious," one said. "That thing is made from garbage. It will fall apart the moment you fire it." Another shouted, "We need real military weapons. You are wasting time." Elias did not argue. He simply said, "If we do nothing, the town is lost. If we act, we have a chance." The officers had no answer to that. So the workers pushed. They pushed with all their strength. The heavy cannon rolled slowly along the rail tracks toward the cliff that overlooked the sea. The townspeople watched, some with fear, some with hope, some with tears in their eyes. The cannon reached the cliff. The sea wind was strong, carrying the salt scent of the ocean. The enemy ships moved closer. They were large, armored, and confident. They did not expect resistance from a small town like this. The workers prepared the cannon. Rafi adjusted the height and angle. Thomas loaded the shell. Jonah checked the firing mechanism. Elias placed his hand on the barrel for a moment, as if speaking to it through silence. Then he stepped back. They were ready. But then a problem appeared. The rail track beneath the cannon shook slightly. It was old. It had not been built to carry something so heavy. If the cannon fired with full force, the recoil might damage the track, causing the cannon to collapse before it could fire again. The workers looked at each other. There was no time to fix the track. The enemy ships were nearly within firing range. They had to decide quickly. Elias spoke, his voice firm and steady. "One shot. That is all we need. One perfect shot." Everyone understood what he meant. The cannon might break after firing. The rail might collapse. But they only needed one shot to make the enemy retreat. One shot to protect the town. One shot to prove that scrap metal could become something powerful. The enemy ships were now in clear view. They moved slowly, confidently, like predators approaching prey. They began preparing their cannons. Smoke rose from their chimneys. Their crews were ready to fire, but the town fired first. "Ready," Elias said softly. The workers took positions. "Fire!" The cannon roared like thunder. The ground shook. The air itself vibrated. Birds shot up into the sky. The townspeople gasped. The recoil pushed the cannon backward, screeching against the rails. The track bent under the force. Metal groaned. But the cannon held long enough. The shell flew across the sea, a dark blur cutting through the morning air. Time seemed to stop. Then, a massive explosion near the lead ship. The shell did not hit the ship directly, but it struck the water near. Its hull with such force that the blast damaged its engine. Smoke poured out. The ship tilted. The others in the fleet began to panic, unsure what had attacked them. They had not expected resistance. They had not expected a weapon of such strength. Confusion spread among their ranks. The ships slowed. Orders were shouted. Flags were raised. The fleet hesitated. Elias knew hesitation was enough. He shouted, "Move it back! Reload!" Even though the rail track was damaged, even though the cannon's recoil had nearly destroyed the base, the workers pushed the weapon back into place. Their muscles burned. Their hands shook. But they pushed. The enemy fleet started to withdraw slowly. They were not defeated completely, but they were scared now. They believed the town had more such weapons. They did not want to risk their fleets on unknown defenses. By the time the workers attempted to prepare a second shot, the ships had already begun turning around. The sea waves swallowed the noise of their engines as they retreated, growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. The town was safe. Not because of armies, not because of official defense plans, not because of government support. It was saved by a group of men who worked in silence, in struggle, in darkness, with nothing but scrap metal, old tools, and unbreakable determination. When the people realized the enemy was gone, cheers broke out. Children laughed, women cried, men embraced each other. The town felt alive again. The officers who had mocked Elias stood silent, ashamed. They approached him slowly. One of them said in a quiet voice, "We were wrong." Elias simply nodded. He did not need praise. He did not need recognition. The victory was not his alone. It belonged to everyone who worked with their hands, their hearts, their sweat, everyone who believed when no one else believed. That night the town celebrated. Food was shared. Lanterns were lit, music returned. But in the shipyard the workers did not celebrate loudly. They sat together in quiet satisfaction, tired but full. The cannon, though damaged, stood proudly. It had done what it was built to do, and on that night the town learned a truth that would live for generations. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from what others throw away. And sometimes the most powerful weapons are built not from steel alone, but from hope, courage, and the will to protect what matters most. Years passed, but the memory of the day the cannon fired lived on in the hearts of the people. The sea continued to crash against the rocks, the sun continued to rise and set, children grew up, old people passed away, but the story stayed. It was told in whispers at first, then in louder voices, then in songs, then in lessons taught to the younger generation. What once felt like a desperate struggle now became a story of courage, unity, and belief. The cannon itself still stood at the shipyard, though it no longer worked. The rails beneath it were bent, the barrel was worn, and rust had begun to form again. But the people did not remove it. They did not repair it either. They left it exactly as it was, and a reminder. The cannon was not just a weapon. It had become a symbol of the power that rested in ordinary hands, a symbol of strength that came not from wealth, not from armies, not from big cities, but from human spirit. Elias became known throughout the region, but fame did not change him. He still walked slowly, still worked quietly, still kept his hands busy with small repairs and metalwork. He did not boast. He did not take credit. He always said the same thing to anyone who thanked him. It was not me. It was all of us. To him, the greatest achievement was not building the cannon. The greatest achievement was teaching others to see value in what others threw away, to see potential in broken things, to believe in themselves when others refused to believe. One day, a group of children from the town gathered around the old cannon. They were young, maybe 10 or 11 years old, full of curiosity. They heard the story many times but wanted to hear it directly from Elias. They found him sitting near the shore repairing a fishing net. His hands moved slowly and patiently, like he was in no hurry for anything. One child spoke first. "Elias, is it true you built a weapon out of trash?" He smiled softly. "Not trash, scrap, there is a difference." "What difference?" another child asked. Elias looked at the ocean, as if he needed a moment to find the right words. "Trash is something that has no value. Scrap is something whose value has not yet been seen." The children stared at him quietly. He continued. "People look at metal and see rust, dents, broken shapes. They think it is useless, but metal remembers. If you heat it, shape it, and guide it, it can become strong again. Humans are the same. When life hurts us, when we make mistakes, when others say we are useless, that does not mean we have no value. It only means our strength is waiting to be found." The children listened carefully, though they did not fully understand yet, but one day they would. The workers who had helped Elias, Thomas, Jonah, and Rafi, all continued living in the town. Their lives changed too. They were no longer seen as simple laborers. They were remembered as protectors, creators, and builders of hope. Thomas became respected among younger workers. People listened to him now. He was no longer seen as impatient or hot-headed. He had learned something important. Strength needs direction. He taught others how to work calmly, how to be patient, how to trust their hands. His anger had become discipline, and that discipline became wisdom. Jonah's family never struggled with hunger again. The town supported them, grateful for his bravery and effort. Jonah himself found something deeper than food or money. He found pride. Not pride that makes the heart arrogant, but pride that makes the heart stand tall. He had spent years fearing failure, feeling like he was not enough. The canon changed that. Whenever doubt tried to return, he remembered the day he helped save the town. And he remembered he was capable of more than he once believed. Rafi grew the most. The quiet machinist who once feared mistakes became a teacher. He taught young apprentices how to handle gears, metals, precision tools. His hands were steady, his voice gentle, his patience endless. He did not rush any student. He taught them the way Elias taught him, slowly, carefully, with respect for detail. He never raised his voice, never shamed anyone for mistakes. He knew mistakes were part of shaping oneself, like hammering steel into strength. Sometimes Rafi would tell his students, "Care is not weakness. It is love in motion." The people never forgot those words. But the world outside continued to change. New technology came. Stronger metals were invented. Modern factories were built far away. The old shipyard did not return to its former glory, but it never fell silent again. People came there to learn. Young workers came from other villages to train under Elias and Rafi. The shipyard became a place of knowledge, not large or famous, but meaningful. Elias grew older. His hair turned completely white. His back bent slightly. His movements slowed, but his mind remained sharp, his heart warm. Some people feared the day he would no longer be there. But Elias did not fear his age. He had lived a life filled with pain, loss, struggle, effort, and meaning. He had already given the world what he needed to give. One evening, when the sun was setting and the sky turned orange, Elias walked alone to the old cannon. The sea wind was gentle that day, brushing against his face like an old friend. He placed his hand on the cannon, the same way he had on the day they first fired it. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He remembered everything at once. The first day he touched the scrap metal. The furnace glowing in the night. The sound of hammers striking steel. Thomas shouting in frustration. Rafi learning to believe in himself. Jonah pushing through exhaustion. The moment the cannon fired. The moment the town was saved. He opened his eyes. He whispered, "We made something from nothing, and that is the greatest power humans have." Years later, when Elias passed away peacefully, the entire town mourned. People gathered around the cannon. No one spoke loudly. No one cried out. Tears came silently like soft rain. They placed flowers on the rail beneath the cannon. Children who had grown older now understood the story fully. They realized that the cannon was not truly a weapon. The real superweapon was the belief they learned from Elias, the belief that value does not disappear, that broken things can be made whole, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that hope once lit can never be extinguished. And so, the town kept telling the story, generation after generation, not as a war story, not as a story of violence, but as a story of courage, unity, patience, and faith. The cannon rusted further with time, but it never lost its importance. It stood like a monument of human strength, not physical strength, but the strength of heart. Visitors from far away came to see it. Students came to learn. Elders told the story like a gentle lullaby. They said, "Once we were given scrap metal, pieces others believed had no worth, but we did not throw them away. We cleaned them. We shaped them. We worked with them. And from that scrap metal, we built something that defended us, something that saved us, something that showed us the truth. Strength is not in what we are given. Strength is in what we create." And people listened, and believed, and remembered.